Charlie Daniels came home from Vietnam in the fall of 1971. The first thing he noticed was how quiet it was. No whir of helicopters, no gunfire cracking through the air, no shouted orders echoing through jungle thickets. The silence should have been comforting, but instead it pressed down on him like a weight. He stepped off the plane, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, wearing a uniform that didn't fit quite right anymore. His mother was there, crying and hugging him, but he barely felt her embrace. The war had hollowed him out, left parts of him behind in the rice paddies and the humid jungles. The boy who'd left home at 19, full of fire and patriotism, didn't exist anymore. What came back was a man haunted by memories he couldn't shake. At first he tried to settle into the rhythm of normal life. His father got him a job at the auto shop, where the smell of oil and grease felt familiar in a way the rest of the world didn't. But the loud clang of metal on metal reminded him of explosions, and the buzzing of power tools was too much like the sound of helicopter blades. He lasted 6 months before he quit. The nights were the worst. He'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of his horrible memories pressing down on him. When he did sleep, the dreams came. Dreams of firefights, of friends who didn't make it, of the wide staring eyes of a young Vietnamese boy he'd shot during a raid. "It's us or them," his sergeant had said, but that didn't make it any easier. He started drinking. At first it was just to get through the nights, but soon it bled into his days. A six-pack turned into a case, then into bottles of whiskey he hid around the house. His mother worried, his father grew distant, and the few friends he'd had before the war stopped calling. He didn't blame them, he wasn't very good company. By the time Charlie turned 30, he was living alone in a tiny apartment above a laundromat. He got by on odd jobs, painting houses, fixing cars, loading trucks at the docks. He didn't stay anywhere long. People would ask too many questions, and Charlie never had answers. "What did you do in the war? Did you kill anyone? Are you okay?" No, he wasn't okay. He hadn't been in years. In 1983, he met Linda at a bar. She was a waitress, younger than him by a decade, with a quick laugh and tired eyes. She wasn't put off by his silence or the way he flinched when someone slammed a door too hard. They started spending time together, and for the first time in years, Charlie felt something close to hope. They got married in the spring of 1984. It was a simple ceremony at the courthouse, just the two of them and the judge. Linda didn't care about flowers or a big reception. She just wanted Charlie to be happy. For a while he was. They bought a little house on the edge of town. Linda worked at a diner, and Charlie found steady work at a hardware store. He liked the routine, the way he could lose himself in the simple tasks of stocking shelves and helping customers. He even started going to the VA, where he met other vets who understood what he was going through, but the past had a way of sneaking up on him. Some nights he'd wake up screaming, the sound of gunfire still ringing in his ears. Other nights he'd sit in the dark smoking cigarettes and staring at the wall, lost in memories he couldn't shake. Linda tried to help, but there were parts of Charlie she could never reach. In 1992, their first child was born, a boy they named Tommy. Holding his son in his arms for the first time, Charlie felt a surge of love so strong it terrified him. He promised himself he'd be a good father, that he'd give Tommy the life he never had. But promises were hard to keep. By the time Tommy was 5, Charlie's drinking was out of control again. Linda threatened to leave more than once, but she always stayed. She loved him, even when it hurt. One night, after a particularly bad fight, Charlie packed a bag and left. He spent a week sleeping in his truck parked near the river, drinking himself into oblivion. When he finally came home, Linda was waiting. She didn't yell or cry. She just looked at him and said, "You need help, Charlie. If not for me, then for Tommy." He started going to therapy after that. It wasn't easy, but it helped. He learned to talk about the war, about the things he'd seen and done. He learned to forgive himself little by little. The years went by. Tommy grew up, and Charlie tried to be the father he'd always wanted to be. He taught his son how to fish, how to change a tire, how to throw a curveball. He was still a quiet man, still haunted by the past, but he was there. By the time Charlie turned 60, his body was starting to betray him. The years of hard labor and heavy drinking had taken their toll. His hands shook, his knees ached, and his lungs flared in pain with every breath. He spent most of his days sitting on the porch watching the world go by. Tommy, now a grown man with a family of his own, came to visit often. He'd sit with Charlie on the porch, drinking coffee and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they'd sit in silence, and that was okay too. On a cool October morning in 2015, Charlie woke up feeling lighter than he had in years. The weight he'd carried for so long was gone, and for the first time, he felt at peace. He sat on the porch, sipping his coffee and watching the leaves fall from the trees. When Linda came out to join him, she found him slumped in his chair, his coffee cup still in his hand. His eyes were closed, and there was a faint smile on his lips. Charlie Daniels had walked a long, hard road, but in the end, he found his way home.